Good evening. I'd like to call to order the August 1st Planning Commission meeting, Goochland County. Mrs. Parker, do we have a quorum?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Will we all please stand for the pledge and prayer? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Lord, we pray that you will guide us in our deliberations tonight. Let us remember our duty to listen to our citizens. Let us also be mindful of our duty to follow the comprehensive plan in our zoning ordinances. We ask this in your name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Roccacherli. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes from last month's meeting? Do we have a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have a motion second. All those in favor?
Aye.
The next item is the citizens' comment period. This is for anything not on the agenda this evening. Anyone wishing to come forward may do so. Seeing no one wishes to come forward, we will close the citizens' comment period. Mrs. Parker.
In terms of requests to defer additions, deletions, or changes to the order of the public hearing, we do have a request. Scott Gazer, Town and Country Partners, LLC, applicant for Manor Town, has requested deferral of public hearing items RZ 2019-00008 and CU 2019-00012 until the September 5th, 2019 Planning Commission meeting. This request to defer requires a motion and a vote.
So moved.
We have a move and second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Cases will be deferred.
Our first Planning Commission action item is in District 3, MAJT 2019-00011, application filed by Marsh, LLC, requesting approval of a tentative subdivision plat for a 64-lot subdivision.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. This is an action item, not a public hearing. It is a tentative plat review for Marsh subdivision. The property is 56.3 acres. It's located here in the courthouse. You can see it's directly across from the county administration building. This property was rezoned back in May by the Board of Supervisors. It's a 64-lot subdivision. The first entrance would be located directly across at the traffic light here in front of the administration building. The second entrance would line up with the county parking lot across here. There was a proffer for the historic house to remain on site. You can see they have worked the historic site into one of the lots there, and then there's significant open space throughout the development. So the lots will be connected to public water and sewer. Each lot would be a minimum of 20,000 square feet. There would be 18.4 acres of open space. As I said, it is 64 housing units for a density of 1.14 units per acre. The plan is consistent with the approved proffer conditions and appears to meet all zoning and subdivision requirements. So we have the standard tentative plat conditions, and these are just things that they need to put on the tentative plat, that the road plans must be approved by VDOT. Roads are built to state standards. Road names must be approved. Water and sewer plans have to be approved by the county prior to the approval of the final plat. They have to adhere to all the public utility permitting process requirements. They have to show all utility and drainage easements. They have to show typical setbacks, radius for all intersections, meets and bounds for the subdivision plat. All of the notes would need to be on the final plat as well. They have to show the proffered conditions on the final plat. Open space must be clearly marked, and the subdivision must be designed in accordance with the rezoning case. All the proffers must be met, and the land coverage ratio shall be required with the POD. And finally, the magisterial district must be shown, and a landscape and lighting plan shall be provided with the POD. So these are standard tentative plat conditions. This is a action item, not a public hearing, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Any questions?
No.
Need a motion?
I'll move for approval. I move for approval.
Second. We have first and second by Mr. Duke. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, Mrs. Parker, on our public hearing items, please.
Mr. Chairman, if the Planning Commission approves, staff would like to present the next two public hearing items together. Each item will require its own motion and vote.
Thank you. I'll do two separate presentations because they don't cover the exact same acreage, but there will be a lot of overlap in the presentations. The first request is a rezoning of 3.3 acres. It's at the northeast quadrant of Broad Street Road and Route 288. This property is located in the far eastern portion of the county. Looking at the subject property, to the west, it's bounded by Route 288, and to the south by the Route 288 and Broad Street interchange. Properties to the north and to the east, primarily zoned commercial. There is a piece of R3, sort of a hole in the donut, that is at the other corner. Look at the comprehensive plan, sort of similar. All the properties in that area are recommended for commercial use, including the subject property. Look at the aerial photo. You can see where the clearing was done for the outer dealership that has been constructed. And looking at the subject property, you can see where there's some paved area from a previous use on the site. Just a brief overview of the history of the site. The property owner acquired about ½ acre of property recently from the Department of Transportation. VDOT had used that for many years as sort of a parking and equipment storage area. About 2.8 acres was rezoned in 2014, and a CUP was obtained for a self-service storage facility, which was not constructed on the site. And if this application was approved, it would supersede those previous approvals. This is the first request for B3 district zoning in the county. The B3 district was created to provide for higher intensity commercial uses, especially along 64 and Route 288, their interchanges in Centerville and Oilville areas. The applicant indicated that they needed the additional height for development of the property. The B3 district would accommodate that. It would allow up to 100 feet. The existing B1 zoning has a height limit of 35 feet. They do have a proffer limitation where they would cap the height at 80 feet. The applicant did submit 2 conceptual plans. Neither one is proffered. I'll just direct your attention to the screen. The primary difference between the two is the one on the top really includes 2 buildings. It would be sort of a hotel building centrally located, and some type of restaurant or retail use along Broad Street, and then a substantial amount of parking. The one to the south, it's really one structure. It's a hotel structure, again, located close to the Broad Street, but it would just be the one building and then the parking. So for the one at the top, it's about a 10,000 square foot. That conceptual plan would accommodate about a 10,000 square foot hotel, about 4,500 square foot of retail or restaurant space. The one on the bottom would accommodate about an 18,000 square foot hotel. There was a community meeting in March. There was one representative of a neighbor that attended, and there was a lot of discussion about what they had plans for the site and how with the type of users they were proposed to use on the site. The applicant did submit several proffers. The first one would restrict the use. Several of the more objectionable uses have been prohibited. That would include funeral homes, golf driving ranges, and similar outdoor recreation activities, mini warehouses. The second proffer would limit the height to 80 feet. The third one would limit them to only one direct access off of Broad Street Road. And the fourth one would just a severance clause. That concludes my presentation on this item. I'll proceed on. Let me first start. Does the commission have any questions on this application?
I'm assuming that the prohibition on building a golf range is because of the one right right there behind it.
That would be a good, yeah.
This would not be allowed in the current B1.
They may be permitted in the B1 either by right or with use permit. Those uses are either allowed by right or with use permit. But if this application were approved, they would be proffered out.
Any other questions for Mr. Coleman? Thank you.
I'll proceed on just quickly to the second application. This is for a conditional use permit, and this is for the 1 acre parcel that fronts on Broad Street. Again, similar, it's located in the eastern part of the county. Subject property is zoned commercially. The comprehensive plan recommends commercial use for this property and the surrounding properties. And I'll just, looking at the aerial photo, kind of zoom into it. Just sort of repeat that you sort of see from the air photo about half the site has some pavement. That's where VDOT utilized it for the parking and equipment storage. And then the western half they was a part of the larger parcel. They actually, when they acquired the VDOT piece, they combined that one with part of the larger parcel to create this sort of freestanding parcel. And again, looking at the conceptual plans, the one at the top, under either conceptual plan, they do plan on having some type of building fronting on Broad Street. If it's 2 buildings, it's probably going to be some type of retail or restaurant use, and if it's just the 1 building, it'll probably be the 1 larger building. Again, the same thing with the community meeting. Both items were discussed at the community meeting. Look at the CEP conditions. There are several that are recommended, and these are, for the most part, standard type conditions we would see with automobile sales. Sorry, let me step back. The applicant indicated that this is sort of a temporary use. The conceptual plans that I showed you would be the long-term plans for the site, but to utilize it in the short term for uses related to the Audi dealership, they do need to obtain the use permit for the auto sales. Should have mentioned that earlier, but. With the CEP, with the conditions, the first one would allow the automobile sales on the site. The second one would require a plan of development on the site. The third one would only allow them to park cars in designated areas. When they attain their POD, there will be limits to like their paving and limits to where they can locate vehicles. The fourth one would prohibit any outside storage on the site. The applicant did not indicate that they were going to have any inoperable motor vehicles here. They would likely be employee parking, and I guess potentially some stock, but they could not have the inoperable vehicles. That would provide some additional screening requirements, and we would engage. Those are code required, and we'd engage the applicant in those kinds of discussions if they wanted to have inoperable vehicles on the site. The sixth one would basically limit them to, or prohibit them from having the attention-getting devices. And the seventh one is sort of the standard condition that if the property is sold or if the lease is transferred, that they would notify the office of that transfer. And that completes my presentation on that item. Be happy to answer any questions.
I'm confused. How come you didn't put a prohibition on automobile sales since the Audi dealer is already there?
Well, the Audi dealership on their property, they already got their approvals in the past. So this is just more recent. They've just recently obtained part of this property. So the automobile sales require the CEP use in whatever district they're in. So if they want to use this property for anything related to auto sales, and even if it's employee parking, then they need to get the CEP approved to use it for that.
What is the difference between that prohibition and that lack of prohibition and the prohibition of not allowing it to be a golf range? See, there was a prohibition on the rezoning that the property couldn't be used for a golf range, and I assumed that was because the golf range was already there. A golf range was already there.
Car dealerships require a CUP.
Yeah.
Versus the golf range would be a zone.
I mean, the applicant offered those restrictions.
Okay.
I think staff did not find that restriction objectionable.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr. Coleman?
Just,
I don't have.
Okay.
just like to remind the commission after the public comment period, 2 votes. Yes, sir. Thank you.
We have two public hearings as well. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, and I can answer that question maybe in a little bit more detail. I'm Jennifer Mullen with Roth Jackson here on behalf of the applicant, LJP Properties, the owner of the property, and with me tonight I have Mr. Larry Page as well. We are asking for the CUP on that specific piece of property to use it as the parking lot because it is in connection with the Richmond Audi that is adjacent across 3 Chop there. In order to park it for employee parking, we have to permit it as an automobile use for automobile sales. So in order to use it as the parking lot that's really accessory to that use, we have to permit it under the CUP.
Okay, gotcha, okay.
Well, thank you all for your time, and thanks to Mr. Coleman for the detailed presentation. Again, just to walk through where the property is located, and it obviously does tie in, as he noted, to the B3 district, and we are requesting the B3 for the additional height. So the uses that were being proposed are all permitted under the B1 zoning, but the B3 would allow us to have that extra height, which we do think is compatible with the location of the property, being that it is adjacent to 288 here. And given the narrowness of the lot, that allows us to have some more flexibility in the development to really use that property to achieve the goals of the comprehensive plan for commercial development. We have proffered it to 80 feet, which is what, as you looked across the street for the M1 district, where the additional hotel is located here, but M1 would also permit you to have height up to 80 feet with certain parameters, and those parameters would be met on our site as well. So that's the 80-foot limitation, which would allow you to have up to a 7-story hotel. We have had users interested in the property. We do not have a proffered site plan because we do not have an end user at this point, but the rezoning would allow us to be able to be shovel-ready and move forward with the plans once we have a user who is on board with the development. Again, we do think this is consistent with the comprehensive plan, as Mr. Coleman noted, as well as the adjacent property. These properties were assembled over a long period of time, which the rezoning was before you all a few years ago, and this allows us to continue that comprehensive development, all consistent with the existing development as well as the comprehensive plan. The properties are also within the overlay district, as was mentioned, so all of the materials and the design elements would need to have a certificate of appropriateness in addition from the design review committee. There is a buffer off of Broad Street. We can get to, so there's a 55-foot buffer for a building off of Broad Street, as well as a landscape setback as you are approaching the 288 interchange there, so that will continue to have the same feel that'll be consistent along the development, which is this stretch. We do not control this parcel here, but that'll allow that similar feel as you drive through, as well as the landscaping. As Mr. Coleman mentioned, we have proffered out particular uses and limited the access to the property to one access point here off of Broad Street, again, to maintain that street wall, to maintain the consistency of the development. With the CUP, I think most items were covered. I'm happy to answer any particular questions with that. There are some existing pictures, just so you can see. This is 3 Chopped Road here as you go back towards the drive shack, and this is the parking lot, which would be used for employee parking until such time as the property is developed. We'd be happy to answer any questions. Would respectfully request your recommendation of approval.
Any questions?
No questions. Only I got, is the access to Drive Shack going to be permanently off of 3 Chop or off of the boulevard through the Audi?
They have access off of, their main access is off of 4 Rings Drive, which is the boulevard adjacent to the Audi, but they do have access through 3 Chopped.
All right. Okay. Any
Thank
other
you.
questions for the applicant? And this is for both the CUP as well as the rezoning?
Yes, sir.
All
So
right.
I'd be happy to answer any questions on
Any
either.
questions on either, because we are hearing both. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We will now open the public hearing for the first case, which is the rezoning Anyone wishing to come forward, please state your name and address. In favor or against?
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Jonathan Lyle. I live at 1521 Mannequin Road. I'm the Managing Director of Highway Information Media, which has worked with Virginia Tourism and VDOT for a number of years promoting tourism. And the idea of another hotel coming to Goochland is a pretty good thing. You know the saying, whatever you love in a vacation, you can find it in Virginia. Love is at the heart of every Virginia vacation, but unfortunately, you can't stay in Goochland when you're going after what you love. So the idea of a hotel coming, though it's not been proffered, is a good idea. The height limitation did bring one thought to mind, and how high can our fire equipment handle a fire? Do we have, and this is a question I don't know. You hate to think about fires, but they do happen. And do we have equipment that can go 7 stories high? Because if we don't, I guess I think they call it assist. And the closest Henrico Fire Department is down off of John Rolfe, I guess. And so just one of those things, because as development occurs, which is a good thing in many ways, controlled growth, we got to have the services to take care of it. And 7 stories, I don't know. I don't know if anybody's from the fire department here or not, but knows the answer to that. Can we handle, you know, our corporate citizens who may have an unfortunate lightning strike or something happens, and we put out a fire 7 stories high? I don't know. So I like the idea of a hotel coming, but I hate the idea of a fire that we can't put out. So thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Lyle. Anyone else? And this is just for the rezoning. Seeing no one, we will close the public hearing on this item. And we will, should we save the votes for back-to-back, or should we go ahead and let's motion and vote now? Or?
We can save them. I think that'd be
Okay,
fine.
let's save them. All right. Okay, we'll open the public hearing for the conditional use permit for the parcel closest to Broad Street, the parking area, the CUP for, the CUP for the car dealership. Anyone wishing to come forward? Speak in favor or against? Seeing none, we will close the public hearing on the CUP. And please correct me if I'm incorrect.
And if I may, read the case descriptions. I don't think we got a chance to do that.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'll read the rezoning, and then we can motion and vote, and then I'll read the conditional use, and we can motion and vote.
Thank you.
So the District 4 rezoning RZ 2019-00005, application by LJP Properties LLC, requesting zoning reclassification of 3.327 acres from B1 Business General to B3 Interchange Commercial, with proffers to allow additional height for hotel and office uses on tax map numbers 59-4-0-5-0 and 59-1-0-47-0. The properties are located at 1610 Three Chopped Road. The comprehensive plan designates this area as commercial.
All right, do we have any further discussion? Do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Mr. Patuck, Mr. Duke seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Recommend approval for the rezoning. Mrs. Parker?
District 4, CU 2019-00010, application filed by LJP Properties LLC, requesting a conditional use permit for auto sales at 1606 Three Chopped Road on tax map number 59-1-0-47-0. The property is currently zoned B1 Business General and is 1.041 acres. The property is proposed to be rezoned B3 Interchange Commercial, see case RZ 2019-00005. The conditional use permit is required by Article 17A, Section 3.3 of the Goochland County Zoning Ordinance. The comprehensive plan designates this area as commercial.
Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Any further discussion? Do we have a motion? Mr. Duke?
I'll second.
Mr. Patuck, seconded. All of those in favor?
Aye.
Recommend approval for the CUP. And Mrs. Parker, the next public hearing item, please.
All right, our next public hearing item is in District 3, CU 2019-00011, application filed by Andrew Moody for River Run Manor, LLC, requesting a conditional use permit for wedding and event venues at 2421 River Road West on tax map numbers 54-5-0-9-0 and 54-3-0-C-3. The property is zoned A2 Agricultural Limited and a total of 61.302 acres. The conditional use permit is required by Article 3, Section 320 of the Goochland County Zoning Ordinance. The comprehensive plan designates this area as rural enhancement area.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Again, Tom Coleman, Principal Planner with Planning and Zoning. As Ms. Parker said, this is a conditional use permit request for a wedding and event venue. This is centrally located in the county, right against the James River boundary. The subject property is located in a rural enhancement area, as are the surrounding properties. The subject property is zoned agriculturally, as well as the surrounding properties are also zoned agriculturally. Looking at the aerial photo, you can see the James River sort of features prominently at the southern border of the property. And the area does feature sort of a low-density residential character. With the use, there is the request for conditional use permit for the wedding and event venue, a place of public assembly. There will be a number of other uses that are allowed by right. That includes the residents. They will reside here. There's also a bed and breakfast, which is a short-term rental hosted in the zoning ordinance. And they also have a winery, which could include a tasting room open to the public and other related uses. Just looking at the site, it features two primary structures. That includes the River Run Manor, which is about an 18,000 square foot dwelling, includes a number of bedrooms and bathrooms. There's also a pool house that's about 1,000 square feet. Both structures include some substantial outdoor areas. There's sort of a terrace that's attached to the house, and the pool house has the pool and tennis courts. I've also looked on here, just showing the parking area. Probably the primary change they would make to the site physically would be to install a gravel parking area, and it'd be shown approximately where it's located on this plan. And this is an exhibit provided by the applicant that sort of shows where the parking would be located and sort of the approximate size of the parking area. Just have a couple of pictures of the outside of the house. Note the front of the house. The rear of the house includes a substantial sort of terrace area and a patio area, and then the pool house, which is sort of architecturally similar, compatible with the house. There was a community meeting held in June. Approximately 30 people attended. There were a number of questions and concerns that were discussed with the application. Probably the primary ones included the winery operations and what was going to be involved with the winery operations, music and how loud the music was going to be and how the music could be managed on site, and then also traffic concerns with increased traffic and traffic safety along River Road West. Just have a couple of measurements here just to provide some perspective on where this is in relation to the nearby residences. This is about 2,000 feet south of River Road West, and it's probably about 1,000 feet from the south bank of the James River. This actually is a lot within River Cliff subdivision, and the closest dwellings are to the west. You can see they're about 700 feet, a little more than 700 feet from the pool house and from the tennis courts. So those are the closest dwellings to the activity areas or the structures on the site. As mentioned with the public assembly use, the primary change to the site would be installing the parking area, which if the conditions are approved with this application, they could be gravel. They would also have to have hard surface, handicap parking, and then accessibility from the parking area to the house. The CUP recommends limiting them to 299 people, and they're not planning any new buildings at this time. We would consider this a high impact use in accordance with our policy, would recommend a 5-year approval if the application is approved. I have a chart, and I'll take a minute to go over this. I'm hopeful that this is helpful to the commission in sort of considering how the recommended CUP conditions with this application compare to some of the other sort of wedding venue type uses that have been approved. I want to point out one thing. The conditions that are listed are with the initial applications. With the Dover Hall, especially in Bandits Ridge, I do know that when they came back for their renewal, the conditions were loosened on them a little bit, but this is really sort of more of an apples to apples comparison to this initial application to the other initial applications. Starting at the top, you'll notice that some of the uses are in parentheses and some of them are not. The uses that are at the top that are not parentheses, those were the CUP uses. They were regulated by the CUP and the conditions. So for example, with the River Run, the wedding venue is subject to the CUP, the winery, the bed and breakfast, and the residence are also uses that were contemplated at the time, but they weren't regulated by the CUP, and the same for the other ones. So you can see there, just looking at the uses, you know, this application is not exactly the same as any of the other applications. And again, looking at the limit on the number of guests, the recommended limitation here would be up to 299 people per event. As far as the limit on activities, that's explained a little more in the condition. It sort of says 1 + 1. The idea there is they would be limited to 1 per day, one sort of primary activity per day. They could have a second activity if it was smaller than and related to the primary activity. So that's explained in the CUP condition. And you do know sort of various type of limit on activities on the different CUPs. As far as amplified sound, I'd want to emphasize that it's not prohibited with these conditions, but what it would do, it would allow amplified sound during a wedding as part of the wedding processional and as part of the wedding ceremony. Outside of that, any other time there's amplified sound, the sound source would have to be within an enclosure. That enclosure could be a temporary structure like a tent or something like that, but anything that's generating that amplified sound would have to be within that enclosure. The uniformed security guard, that would only be required if there's alcohol and music and a certain number of guests. In this case would be, there'd have to be alcohol, music, and a minimum of 100 guests. With the traffic study, this is similar to what we did for Dover Hall. The idea is to allow them to be open for a year, and then about a year, look at an event, have a traffic engineer look at an event to see how traffic is being handled on the site, to make sure, and also to make sure that any events are not creating traffic backups on the road, and make sure they're not creating an unsafe, look at the crash history to make sure they're not creating an unsafe traffic condition there. And the parking spaces, that's sort of correlated to the limit on the number of guests. And then looking at the acreage, just looking at all of these uses, again, I think it's apparent that most of these uses have been approved on fairly substantial size pieces of property.
Any questions for Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, do you have any questions on the chart? I can certainly come back to it.
I thought when we did Dover Hall, there was some on the sound, an enclosure. They allowed to have an enclosure with a tent with.
The initial one was no amplified sound.
Right.
When they came back for a renewal,
Right.
there was some, especially Dover Hall and Bandits Ridge, when they came back for their second application, they received some relief from some of the conditions. So this is what was originally approved for Dover Hall.
Right. Okay. Have you had any complaints?
For Dover Hall? Actually, there were a couple of complaints. Actually, the main complaint was the fireworks that took place during their CUP approval. That was probably the one that really generated complaints that I'm aware of, and there have not recently been any complaints with any of these operations. Going to looking at the conditions, the first one would allow the wedding venue use, or the place of public assembly use. The second one would limit it to the conceptual plans. As showed earlier, the primary change to the site would be to provide that large parking area. The third one would limit them. They could not start the activities until they got POD approved for the site. The fourth one would require them to have a minimum of 75 spaces and to have an overflow parking area that they could show on their POD. The fifth one is required, they are required to get a waiver because typically a parking lot this size would have to be paved, but there's a waiver request to, if this is approved, to allow the parking to be gravel. The sixth one is just the access road. They have an existing access road, but we want to make sure that fire rescue and the Department of Community Development have an opportunity to review that to make sure that it can accommodate fire rescue equipment. They would be limited to one detached sign that's visible from Route 6. They would have to install submit a lighting plan for get any external lighting approved. There's a limit of 299 guests for any CUP activity. Again, that's the number 10 is the daily limit, and I'll just read that. A maximum of one event is permitted each day, except that 2 events are permitted if they are for the same user, relate to each other, and one event lasts 2 hours or less. So it does allow them to have like a secondary event. The hours of operation, the Monday through Saturday would be 8 to 11, and Sunday would be 11 to 9. Then the amplified sound, again, the subwoofers would be prohibited. That's sort of consistent prohibition that the commission may recall on other applications. And then there are those 2 exceptions for the amplified sound, that the wedding processional ceremonies can have them during the processional ceremony, and that the amplified sound is permitted inside the open structure. And again, there's not a restriction on unamplified sound. The restrictions are only on the amplified sound. The uniformed security guard, again, if they have 100 guests, music and alcohol, they'd have to have either an off-duty deputy or security guard from an appropriate agency. Any alcohol consumption would have to be consistent with ABC rules. It's a prohibition on fireworks. The traffic impact analysis, again, after 12 months of operation, that's when we'd have the traffic engineer look at an actual event to see how traffic is behaving on the site, and do some other research like on accidents to see if there's been an increase in accidents in the area. The last one's an annual notice that they would be required to notify the CD staff or the zoning administrator on their scheduled activities and to keep that updated. This includes a recommendation for a 5-year approval if the application is approved. And then again, the last is the standard if the property or the lease transfers, that the planning office would be notified of that. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Could you go back to the slide where it was compared with the other venues? I'm just curious, how you determine the parking requirements?
The parking requirement for most of those, it's how much the site was designed to hold. So, for example, with this site, the 75 is related to the 299. There's generally a 1:4 ratio. Mm-hmm. Now, what we also require on all of these is for them to designate an overflow parking area. So there'll be a parking requirement based on a 1:4 ratio that could be tied to for example, the occupancy of the building. But then sometimes some of these have an opportunity for larger events, and for those larger events, they would be utilizing the overflow parking.
Because according to this, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of correlation. Take for instance, Adams School has a 700 guest limit, but you only require 53 spaces. Mm-hmm. And for Dover Hall, for example, has a 400 guest limit, and you require 63 parking spaces. So I'm kind of just curious.
Well, like for example, Dover Hall, that was tied to related to an occupancy limit to the building, but they weren't. Like you see, like right there, under limit of CUP activities, they could have 1 per month that exceeded 299, and that 1 per month that exceeded 299, they would be utilizing the overflow parking. Now, for weddings, for Adams International, for example, that is a little bit of an outlier because they do have that large maximum. You know, Adams International is a little bit different in that site had a long-standing other uses on the site. If I recall correctly, they had like a wine distribution business on the site previously, and it was being used as a school already. They were having camps there already. So there is still a limitation on the number of events they can have, the size of the events, but not all the events could be 700 people.
Okay.
So it's not, it's not like and this is, it is a public hearing process, and sometimes some of these conditions might be changed based on either public comment or the commission or board prerogative.
Any other questions for Mr. Coleman? Thank you. Would the applicant like to come forward?
Just wanted to go ahead and play the video straight up.
Sure.
Would you like the video first?
Sure, thank you. Thank you all for taking the time to hear this.
Hi, I'm Kim Moody, and I've been in the wedding industry the last 15 years. And today, I'm so excited to release to you the Richmond area's newest event venue, the Estate at River Run. We are so excited to present to you all this gorgeous 61-acre Georgian revival mansion so that you can host your party with your family and friends. We think this is going to be an epic place to celebrate weddings and all of the fun things life has to offer, and we can hardly wait to have you here.
Thank you all. Again, I'm Kim Moody. I'm here,
Would you please state your address?
sure. I actually live in Blackstone, Virginia at 201 South Main Street. And I'm here with my husband, Andrew, and my two children, Parrish and Carrington, who would be living on the 4th floor of the home there at the house, and our business partners, Doug and Tamara Adams, who are the owners of the Adams International School that was referenced on the chart earlier.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time tonight, and I just want to start off by saying thank you to Goochland County. We have been eyeing this property since last October, and met with them in the winter time to see. Andrew and I sat down with many of the Goochland employees to kind of see what we were looking at as a worst-case scenario of what we would need to do to make the site open to the public. Bring it up to commercial code and make it safe for everyone involved and to be good neighbors in the area. So from that, we have gone through a number of processes, and the collaboration with them has been extremely helpful. And as you all know, this property's been on the market the last 5 years and has not sold as a residence. When the Masseys built it, they obviously built it for entertaining and for hosting parties. And it was a joke that night of the public hearing, many of the neighbors had been there, celebrating with the parties before. Because I said, well, was the sound an issue before? And they said, no, we were here too. So we're hoping they'll be back for that as well. As far as other buyers for the property, there is a backup contract on the property. We've had it under contract since about Memorial Day. It's set to close the day after the Board of Supervisors meeting in September, and the backup contract is another party that wants to do similar operations as us, but likely with a larger count of events per year. So just something to consider as we kind of work through this. I also know that a couple subdivision developers had looked at it as well. So we hope that we can come in and be good neighbors, allow the property to continue to be primarily as it sits right now without a lot of future development, and just, host and bring it back to life. So just a couple quick notes that I wanted to make. Parking consideration. We have had a few contractors out to look at it, and the place that we were originally proposing may not be cost effective. It may be that it's best for us to do the parking where this actual conceptual plan notes, and you'll see it's closer to the drive circle, so it's farther away from the subdivision there on the left side. So it's kind of the long
yellow strip near the front, near the drive circle. And that's, again, where the Masseys parked their friends and family when they attended parties there. Just a couple quick things that we wanted to ask for your concessions on is we wanted to hopefully start as early as 9 a.m. on Sundays if a couple wanted to have a breakfast in the house or something like that. So not anything massive there, but just, after luxury events like we usually work, there is a common hosting of a brunch or a breakfast. So I just wanted to point that out. Security guard, we're happy to do. It's not a problem. I would love for it to be a little bit higher number so that if we were even giving a little relief for, like 135 people and less, we don't need security, but, higher than that we could or something like that. The head count, as you mentioned, Dover Halls is much higher. The ability to host people within Dover Hall is much smaller than the River Run property, so we would love for that amount of people to get increased just a little bit, even if it was just 350. Inside the house, we're not asking for any additional people. Just to be clear, that would just be if everything were exterior. And then the last thing is the sound, as we've mentioned before. The amplified sound is allowed in spaces that are contained by a tent and tent walls and sides. And the request would be that in these particular yellow areas that are closest to the river, so the 4 spots, it's a flagstone terrace and brick terrace off the house, the poolside terrace, the tennis court, and then the drive circle. For those particular 4 places that we'd be allowed to have the ability, when we do have outdoor events, to have amplified sound for a dinner and dancing during those times, even if it has an end time of 10:30 p.m., that's totally fine. But occasionally there will be couples that want to have the event outside totally. Most of the clients that we serve in the luxury market typically prefer not to be outdoors, so I don't think this is going to be anything massive, but we do want them to have the ability to make the decision when we're paying a mortgage as high as we're going to be paying. We want to be good neighbors. My husband Andrew and I are both from rural communities. Tamara and Doug live here in Goochland and have for the past 10 years, and it's important to us to continue to be good neighbors there at River Run. So tonight we would respectfully request your approval on the items that we have spoken through. As mentioned, as this goes up for the Board of Supervisors next month, that is reflective of the closing date for the property and at which time we could start. Do you all have any questions?
Anyone have questions for the applicants or staff before we open the public hearing? Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question for staff. The security comparisons that have been placed in the CUP relative to other events, where do we stand on that? Maybe I missed that on the slide with respect to 1 security guard required, I guess I should say uniform security with 100 people with music and alcohol. How does that compare to the other here? It's the same except for Adams.
Yeah, for the initial applications, we've generally been pretty consistent at 100.
Okay. All right.
Tom, the $299 limit on guests, and they're asking for it to be higher, maybe to $350. Is that possible?
I think the considerations are the occupancy of the building is limited to 299.
Okay.
So that's sort of where the 299 came from. It's comparable for Dover Hall, but they were given an allowance greater than the 299. I think one consequence, if the board was amenable to increasing that number, the number of parking spaces would go up, because if we maybe look at doing like 88 parking spaces to accommodate that number of people, if that's how many people are going to be allowed in an event.
At the community meeting, weren't they saying that in these bigger wedding events, generally they were bussed in from a hotel from would not have a car per 4 people?
I mean, I can defer to the applicant on that. I think from our experience, the other sites, they need parking for their activities. Maybe they do have buses,
Right.
but they still need a substantial amount of parking.
Any other questions for Mr. Coleman?
Thank you, Tom.
Any questions for the applicant before we open the public hearing? No. All right. It's time. Let's open up the public hearing. Anyone wishing to come forward, please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Maria Becker, and I am living at 2371 River Road West, which is the property immediately east of River Run Manor. So I would obviously be very much affected by this thing. And I have spoken to other neighbors who have big estates on this property, Mr. Willie Good, Dr. Reynolds, and we unfortunately are all very much against this. This area has been residential, agricultural for ever since we have lived there, which is since 1977, and we have in the past fought commercial changes in this area, and there is a designated area in Goochland for commercial enterprises, and we feel that this area, the corridor between, say, the State Farm and 522 should remain the way it is with the farms and agricultural residential area. That's why we have moved out there, to have peace and quiet, and no matter what they say with noise and music and people, the traffic pattern is going to change tremendously. There is going to be noise. I can tell you that when somebody drives down their driveway, I call it the Massey driveway, with a motorcycle or anything, I can hear it in my backyard. The other problem that is particular to me is that our properties are so adjacent. There is no boundary, there's no fence or special boundary. If you walk from the Massey property into my property, you don't really know where the one ends and the other starts. The thing also is that for the Massey property to get to the river, they cannot go down to the river right where their property is, but they can easily take a little left and go down. We have a road, we have a right-of-way over the railroad to the river, and there is none to the east, to the west that I know of, other than this side of 522, and the next one to the east is Dr. Reynolds' property. So I'm just thinking a scenario where somebody will, from a wedding party or from a wine tasting, decides it's hot, I'm going to go down to the river. They're not going to, a security guard is not going to be able to control 300 people or 299 for that matter. And the thing at the community meeting in the Massey residence was, we were told also that the vineyard was going to be operating daily, and that they are going to have a tasting room with wine tasting on a daily basis. The wedding events are going to be on the weekends.
Please make your closing statement. You're over your time. Thank you.
I will. So in other words, since there is a commercial area for in Goochland, we think it should stay there. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Excuse me. Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission, my name is William Good. I live at 2285 River Road West, which is parcel F of Mount Bernard Farm. River Run Manor is a portion of both parcels B and C. A commercial operation does not belong in the center of an established farm community. In addition to any traffic problems which might occur, I'm a little concerned about any excessive alcohol use which could result in traffic problems. The main problem that concerns me, the value of our properties may be affected and go down. In conclusion, I hope the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors will not throw our neighbors under the bus in order to make a few extra tax dollars. Gentlemen, thank you for letting me express my opinions, and hopefully you'll deny the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Richard Reynolds. I live at 2121 River Road West and operate a farm there that is divided roughly in half by the highway. I'm concerned primarily about traffic issues. We now have a situation where we try to cross that road with a tractor or farm equipment and feel that it is already very dangerous to do so with any kind of slow-moving equipment. I, as mentioned before by the previous speakers, remain very concerned about how this may adversely impact a problem that already exists. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Carol Rice, and I live at 1509 Riverview Road, which is the subdivision that's been referenced. Our property line, our 7 acres, backs right up to the Massey property. I'm concerned about 3 things: the parking, the lighting, and the sound. We're very familiar, the whole back of our house looks right out over this property. There's a very deep gully between our property and the Massey property, and where the original parking was going to be was on this grassy, very sloped area. I assume maybe the plan has changed, but I wasn't sure that was definite to move the parking somewhere else. Our concern is paving or gravel. It's a beautiful grassy view that we have most of the year, and I just don't want to look out on a Walmart parking lot. You can't tell me that 75 parking spaces will hold 300 people. People don't come 4 by a car. The other is the references to the overflow parking. Well, where would that be? It's a very steep and angled lot, and I just don't know where all this parking is going to go. My concern. Oh, and also, I think maybe the plan was changed because where they were originally saying the parking was going to be, it drops off and it would take a tremendous amount of fill. So I'd like to know more about the parking. The other thing is the lighting. When you have 300 people coming and going, what about the lighting? I don't want to look out. I have a beautiful dark sky. You can see the prisons, in the distance. But I hope there would have to be lighting, that it would be required to be down lighting and appropriate lighting that would not be on 24 hours a day, because otherwise we have a modern open house, glass along the back. We're going to be lit up all the time. So I would hope that lighting would be, the environment would be seriously considered. And sound, I'm very concerned about the sound, because if they're not using the inside, everything's going to be outside. Tents don't hold in sound. And if this is going to be passed, that there be a decibel level over which sound cannot go for certain hours, not just that it's enclosed, but that enclosed or not, it can't be over a certain decibel level. And even if it's inside, that the doors have to be open or they have to be closed after a certain time. And that's not uncommon. I've been doing some research. We have a son who's getting married in an area where that's very strict. So I'm not thrilled about this situation. It's better than 60 homes back there, but I do think there's minutia that I hope attention will be paid to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dustin Smith. I live at 2380 River Road West, which is actually, if you're at the subject property, directly across the street from it. And I want to apologize to you guys because you seem really nice, and I hate to be standing here. I hate to be standing here saying, you know, that I don't want something to happen, and I hope that if it does happen, they will forgive me. But if I went to Blackstone where they lived and wanted to do something like this directly across the street from them, I sincerely hope that they would have the right to object to it. This property I don't feel is suited. I know that we have established in Goochland other properties where this is done. We hear sound from the Riverview subdivision. If somebody's having a rager, you know, or they're having a big party, that sound hits myself, my family, our kids, every time it happens. Fortunately, is not a regular occurrence. It's occasional. I know that if there's amplified sound, just because of the way that land is and having lived there since I was, well, my entire life, I've lived there, 1986. So I know I will hear that sound, and I know that it will affect me. The sound that I hear is not professional from the sense of a DJ or from the sense of a wedding or a venue. I'm hearing somebody's home system, and I can hear it every time it happens. I've driven over there in great frustration trying to get my son, who's my baby, to sleep, trying to figure out where it was, and we do not have, to my knowledge, a noise ordinance in Goochland that really gives me anything to go back on and say that's too loud. So for that and many of the other reasons that the neighbors have brought up, you know, I hope that you guys can look at this and say this isn't a good idea for the area, and if that's not possible, then I hope it's with severe restrictions to what can be, what can go on. Thank you for your time.
Anyone else?
Good evening. My name is Susan Smith, and I live at 2370 River Road West. I'm the mother of that lovely man that was up here. I moved out here with my late husband 36 years ago because I wanted a bucolic setting, a quiet setting, somewhere I could bring up my children and know that it would remain that way, that it would remain rural, that it would be quiet, and we would have the peace that growing Goochland gracefully has offered us so far. I respect what these people are doing. They want to run a business, but I truthfully do not feel like this is the best setting for it. All of the other venues like this that I've known have been, except for maybe Dover Hall, have been in an area that was further out, larger pieces of property. I may be wrong on this, but my gut feeling is this just isn't the right situation for this venue. I thank you.
Thank you.
Traffic, also, one more thing. The traffic issue is a huge one. As Mrs. Becker said, right now we have horrible traffic on Route 6, and there's really nothing we can do about it. But it's supposed to be a scenic highway. I mean, I was always told that, and that we had certain restrictions on that. And we fought that traffic for a long time and would really like not to have to continue that fight on that. Thank you.
Anyone else? Seeing no one else, we will close the public hearing. I have a question, or does anyone have a question for applicant or staff? Or would the applicant like to have a rebuttal? I guess let's start there first. Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you neighbors for coming out. I just wanted to make a couple quick notes. So we would love to have this property located in a more commercial area because it would make it much easier for us. But obviously, it is where it stands, and there's nothing that we can do to change that particular thing. My husband and I have been looking for the last 2 years to kind of figure out how we could simplify my career as a wedding planner. Right now, I spend about 7 hours a weekend when I drive to the homestead and work at all of these luxury properties all over the state. And so for us, this is not to create something where we can have a booking 56 weekends a year. This is something where we can kind of focus on what are our peak times where we can sell the venue rental for the space and not have to work as hard as we are right now and have for the last 15 years. Just to address the lighting concern, all of the fixtures for the exterior that we were looking into are dark sky compliant, which basically in a nutshell means that the light would go downward instead of up and out. So I hope that the neighbors will rest easier on that aspect. My background is in interior design and architecture and construction, so I'm very sensitive to the needs of the community on that. The parking area, we have resolved to move that over to the flatter location so that we are not disturbing as much of the earth, and that would give us longer distance to the neighborhood itself. So I think that issue is sort of resolving itself. And then we did ask for a decibel meter measurement to give us when we are trying to host events that are uncovered sound. And my suggestion was if our two closest neighbors are 700 feet and 780 or whatever the measurement was, let me go to that property line in the line of sight of their house. And I can stand at our property line and check what the decibel meter is reading so that we can be respectful neighbors. But the concern from the county staff on that aspect, which is certainly understandable, is that there's really a difficult policement of that type of thing. And a decibel meter is also very inconsistent. It's based on where you take the reading from. So if you take the reading at the stage, it's going to be like a hairdryer could be over the number of decibels that you would put in place if you take it close enough. And then if you go out to that property line, which is obviously wooded, to measure the decibel, then that's going to give you a more accurate reading for what that neighbor would be hearing or experiencing. But it's not likely that somebody's going to want to come out at 9:30 at night and read that in the woods. So that was the concern. But we did ask for that because I know that that's the kind of restrictions that I deal with in our business at other properties. Do you all have any questions?
Do you have any estimate of about approximately how many events you would have within a year that would have outside amplified music or whatever?
On our performa, I have that we are hoping to average about 36 weddings a year. And like I said, of those clients, I doubt that it's going to be a whole lot that are going to do more than the ceremony and cocktail hour outside. I serve a luxury clientele now and have for about the last 4 years of my 15-year career, and the bulk of all of those weddings are indoors unless it is at somebody's estate in their home, many of which have been in Goochland County, in small subdivisions on like a 5-acre lot in somebody's backyard. So if their parents have a large home or the couple has a large home, we've done a lot of the higher profile events in this county already and never had any problems on much, much smaller parcels than the 61 acres at River Run. So as far as the quantity goes, I would assume we're probably talking less than 10 a year in that entire scope. And I would honestly be surprised if it would even be that much, because the people that are going to come to rent that type of a facility for that type of an amount of money are going to want to be in air conditioning and heat, no mosquitoes.
Any other questions for the applicant?
Even with that being said, even so, you wouldn't want to proffer not having the amplified sound. You want to be able to have it if that is something that fits your market.
Right. I think the biggest thing that I've learned in the type of clientele that we serve is they want options, and most of the time they don't exercise those. But with the amount of money that is going to be paid each month for this mortgage and this operating facility. It's not just a 5-acre equestrian property. It's a pretty sizable investment for us and our family, and my entire career is going to hinge on this. So I don't want the inability to have exterior music, especially for like a cocktail hour, or and like I said, if a restriction has to be placed that the exterior amplified sound that's not in a tent ends at 10:30, I think that's reasonable, and that's the case at many localities. So I would think that it might be better to look at an end time restriction if the decibel meter was not something that you all wanted to consider because of enforcement. I'd also just like to offer that our company has handled as much as 97 weddings in a year over the years that we've been in business, and we've never had a complaint about noise, and most properties that we work at are on facilities much, much smaller than River Run. On average, across the state, I would say we probably work at 20-acre facilities or smaller with closer neighbors. Thank you.
I have a question for staff with regard to the property, as to what can be, what the property by right, what could be done with the property outside of the CUP.
I'm sorry, what was that?
What can be developed on this property by right as it stands today, taking this application out of the question?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, a winery could open up by right. It could have many activities associated with winery, which could include a wine tasting room, production of wine, the selling of materials and things like that. It does not meet the criteria to have weddings or anything like that, so that big impact would not be allowed, but other activities related to the winery would be allowed. Certainly a subdivision of this acreage, it could be re-subdivided. As mentioned earlier, by living there, they can operate that unhosted bed and breakfast that's allowed by right. So there's a number of uses like that that would be allowed by right.
Okay. Any questions for Mr. Coleman? Gentlemen, any discussion? Motions?
I've been to a lot of functions there when Bill Massey owned the place, and most of the functions, probably 2/3 of them were held outside on the patio, down by the pool and all. And we did have music, amplified music there. I don't know of any, a couple of the functions, I was chairman of the organization that put it on, and I don't know of any complaints. I never heard of any complaints about it. I know that it is a concern, but I kind of agree that I think most of the functions are going to be indoors. Maybe a small wedding ceremony out on the balcony, but I think most people, like the applicant says, will want to be indoors especially in the Virginia summers, like last week. You're not going to want to be outside in wedding dresses and makeup and all that stuff in the heat. The sound, it is a way of measuring the sound. We're in the process of developing a sound ordinance, but that hasn't come through yet. Dover Hall, like the chart showed, we didn't allow any amplified sound, and they came back with a modification to do it. Dover Hall is certainly in an area that's fairly well open, not very wooded, has a lot of residences around it. The fireworks was the big thing that we heard. I know the house has been on the market for a long time, and I'm just trying to balance the use of something like this versus subdividing it and putting 10 or 15 homes in there, where there is no restriction on noise, parties, outdoor sound, pool parties, things like that. Even in my neighborhood, we have neighbors that have pool parties and teenagers, and the noise sometimes can get pretty loud, but because it's a residential neighborhood, you can't, there's no control of it. So I think this potentially is a much better use of the property than converting it into a subdevelopment.
Well, with the history of the existing vineyards of this type, I don't think any of them have yet been declared a public nuisance. So I'm gonna be the bad guy, and I'm going to move that we approve.
Before you make that motion, does anybody else have any comments? Mr. Duke, this is in your district.
I don't have any comments.
And I guess, you know, if someone were to live in this place, I think you brought up a good point. They could have a party here with this size of an event or size of piece of property, and not really anyone can say anything about it other than complaints. I mean, I live in a very rural area, and I know that, you know, farm equipment, cows and whatnot, while it's music to my ears, you know, other people, you know, you hear about, you know, dogs barking and what have you that are annoying, but we are in Goochland, and it's a mix of people sounds, animal sounds, tractor sounds, and I would imagine being this close to the train tracks, that train's pretty loud through there. And I love that sound, because I've always heard it growing up in Goochland. Anyway, anybody have a motion or any
Yes,
other
I move.
comments?
Yes, I move that we recommend this for approval.
I'll second.
Gentlemen, just to clarify, good evening, is that as the staff has presented it?
Yeah, thank you for that. Are any changes? I noticed, just to make a statement, the applicant spoke about a time of 9 a.m. Sunday, and then also there was concern, I guess, with respect to amplified sound. So is there any comments or recommendations, or as is?
I don't see a problem with people having breakfast or something there on Sunday morning. I
mean, that's certainly indoor activities.
Yep.
It seems that all of these others have been approved at a lower standard, and then they've been allowed to
Subsequently.
increase as the time went on, proving they were good neighbors. I mean, it sounds like this type of thing happens all the time, and it turns out to not be quite as disastrous as everyone feels. And it's going to come, I mean, this is what, a 5-year CUP?
It is a 5-year for the first. That's what's on the table.
They
All
can
right.
come back within a year and ask for
Correct.
change.
Correct. So we have a motion.
Motion.
I second as is.
You second as
Yeah,
is.
yeah.
All right. Let's take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
The motion passes on a 4-1 vote.
Thank you.
Our next application tonight is in District 4, RZ 2019-00006. Application filed by Howard D. Knuckles, Jr., requesting zoning reclassification of 222.206 acres from RP Rural Preservation to A2 Agricultural Limited, downzoning on tax map number 46-1-0-4-A. The property is located at 867 C Road. The comprehensive plan designates this area as rural enhancement area.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. This is Joanne Hunter, Director of Community Development. This is a public hearing for a rezoning request submitted by Howard Knuckles. It's actually a downzoning for 222 acres from rural preservation to A2, which is agricultural limited. The property is located just east of the Oilville area. You can see here, this is the comprehensive plan, and the property is designated rural enhancement area. As you can see, the property is located just north of Interstate 64 on Say Road. And you can see the property has already been platted, and it shows a subdivision of 44 lots, which are known as Knuckles Grant subdivision. The property is zoned right now RP. Surrounding properties are A2, and then there are some rural residential areas also nearby. The property has not been developed as it was approved for a subdivision. You can see there's one residence on there, and the property is actively farmed. So the rezoning to the RP occurred in 2005 to allow for a 44-lot subdivision. A subdivision plat was granted for Knuckles Grant on August 28th, 2008. The applicant did come back and vacate the subdivision lot lines in 2018, and they are now wishing to come back and rezone the property back to agricultural limited to preserve the existing farm and pass it down to his children as is undeveloped. So this does show you the subdivision plat. There was a community meeting held in June at the Goochland Baptist Church. Staff, Mr. Duke, Mr. Rockacharlie, Mr. Myers, and board member Mr. Alvarez attended. 4 citizens also attended the meeting, and they also supported the downzoning of this property. Because it is downzoning back to agricultural, no proffers are offered or requested by staff. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? Would the applicant like to say anything?
Good evening, the planning board. My name is Howard D. Knuckles Jr. I live at 11301 Cedar Glade Lane, Rockville, Virginia. I'm asking for a downzoning so that this will facilitate me passing this to my children. That's all it is, plain and simple. Do you have any questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now open the public hearing. Any of those who wish to speak in support or against, please come forward. We have 2.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Jonathan Lyle, 1521 Mannequin Road. I am a director for the Monacan Soil and Water Conservation District, and this is something that I dream about, that people are putting property into agricultural and not into subdivision. So I want to sleep well tonight, Mr. Knuckles. Thank you so much. I think Mr. Elvis is about the only other gentleman I know of who has had a similar zoning to put things back into agriculture. This is something I hope you will not have any issue supporting. You know, without farms, we don't have food, and most folks I've met eat once a day, some people more than once a day, and that's up to them to decide on that. But this is a great opportunity for us to keep Goochland rural. And Mr. Knuckles, I'm sure you know about making sure you're in land use so you get the advantages of agricultural land. So I hope you'll support this.
Thank you.
My name is Linda Moore. I live at 2164 Prophet Road, and I am one of the 4 that came to the meeting, and I am delighted with Mr. Knuckles' decision, and I am in full support, especially where that property is located. To not have 44 homes going in and giving it back to Mother Nature is a dream come true for me. I'm with Mr. Lyles. I'm going to sleep real good tonight, and I hope you all are too. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone else wishing to speak? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Gentlemen, do we have any questions, any motions, vote?
I move we approve it.
Yeah, this is a no-brainer. Anybody who complain about this would be the same people who would complain about winning the lottery.
We can omit those comments from the motion. All right, fellas, do we have a motion?
I move we approve it as it is.
I second it.
Who wants to take it? All right, we have Mr. Duke with the motion and Mr. Myers with the second. Got to be faster, Mr. All right, all of those in favor? Aye. All right, recommend approval for the downzoning of the Knuckles property. Mrs. Parker.
And our final item for tonight is in District 4, RZ 2019-00007, application filed by Highview LLC requesting zoning reclassification of 23.1 acres from A2 Agricultural Limited to R1 Residential Limited with proffers to create a 9-lot single-family residential subdivision on tax map number 33-1-0-12-0. The property is located on Hanover Road, northeast of Oilville Road. The comprehensive plan designates this area as single-family residential low density.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. Good evening again, Planning Commissioners. I do have an administrative item to address before we get into the presentation here. The applicant did make a minor word change in one of the proffers dealing with house size. Because that proffer was submitted today, our deadline is proffers need to be submitted 48 hours before the application. If you're amenable to hearing that minor change, we would need it to waive the time limits for the proffer. So I would need a motion and second to present that proffer change to you. And you should have the proffer, a black line copy of the proffers at the dais with you.
Very small change.
Yes.
So do we have a motion to accept?
Yes, I move we
proffers
accept
as changed?
A second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
So
you.
this is a rezoning request submitted by Highview LLC to rezone a property from A2 to R1. Acreage is 23.1 acres. It is located just east of the Oilville area. It is on a Hanover Road, just past Oilville Road, and just past the Interstate 64 Oilville interchange. The property is in the Oilville Village. It is just at the edge. The comprehensive plan designates it single-family residential, low density, and surrounding properties include the industrial park, on Turkey Creek Road, and other single-family development and rural enhancement areas. The property, as I said, is zoned A2, and they are requesting R1 zoning. There are RR zoning in the area. At the time when those properties were zoned RR, the lot size was a little bit different than what it was required right now. Right now, the RR district is 5-acre lots. However, this subdivision directly across the street is zoned RR, and the lots are 2-acre size. These lots are generally between 3 and 5, and these are between 3 and 5. So you can see the property's undeveloped right now. There is an electric line that splits the property right in half. The applicant is proposing to develop on the east side of the transmission line, and the west side would be the open space for the development. They are proposing a 9-lot subdivision. Each lot would be a minimum of 1.5 acres and would be served by individual water and sewer systems. The development will include 5 acres of open space. So the comprehensive plan, as I indicated, this is designated low-density residential. That designation recommends an average of 2 acres per unit. If you include the open space and the 9 lots, it would average to about 2.3 acres per unit. And in response to neighborhood concerns, the applicant has made some additional proffers, including a 50-foot buffer along Hanover Road, a 100-foot primary building setback, and a 75-foot tree save area along the north property line. And I'll show you these when I show you the conceptual plan. And then the proffer change that was submitted today, the previous language was a minimum house size of 2,500 square feet, which included the garage. So the change is that the proffer would be 2,500 square feet of living area, and that would be exclusive of the garage. So if you had a garage, it would be not included in that 2,500 square feet. So here's the conceptual plan of the property. As you can see, the property is sort of split by the transmission line. You can see the buffer along Hanover Road, and then they also have a tree save area and a buffer here along the northern property line. And then this area is about 5 acres and would be open space for the development. The applicant has proffered elevations in addition to that house size of 2,500 square feet of living area, exclusive of the garage. This is an example of the type of homes that they would construct on the property. This is the first subdivision that is under the 2019 proffer model. Previous subdivisions in the last few years have been under the 2016 legislation, which did require the applicant to certify proffers and things like that. That is not required. We still run the project through the capital impact model, and it shows the impacts. What it comes out to for this development is a capital impact per housing unit of $9,810. The applicant has proffered that as part of their cash proffer, and they've also proffered the Marshall-Swift index as it increases depending on the Marshall-Swift each year. We don't just want to show you the impacts, we like to show you revenue also. These are very rough numbers of the potential revenue. There's one-time fees through permits and things like that, and then recurring revenues. So the real estate tax estimate, very generally, this is based on a average house value of $313,000. Would be a real estate tax estimate to the county of just under $15,000. And then a vehicle tax of $4,320. So the recurring revenues to the county would be just under $20,000. And then the one-time fees for the approvals would be about $20,000 as well. Excuse me. The applicant did hold a community meeting on June 20th. Mr. Duke, Rocker Charlie, and board member Mr. Alvarez, and about 15 citizens attended the meeting. There were questions and concerns regarding traffic, density, and sightlines from the proposed entrance onto Hanover Road. So I do want to review the proffers. The applicant did try to address many of these concerns through proffers. So the conceptual plan that I showed you is proffered. The buffer requirements, as I indicated earlier in the presentation, they have a natural tree save area and a buffer of at least 50 feet along Hanover Road, a natural tree save area of 75 feet on the northern boundary of the property, and then a natural tree save buffer of 25 feet in width along the eastern boundary of the property. The density would be no more than 9 lots. The building setback would be a 100-foot rear yard adjacent to the parcels to the north, excuse me, and a 75-foot building setback for the accessory structures. The elevations as proffered, and the minor change about the living area being 2,500 square feet. No lot shall have direct access onto Hanover Road. They would record protective covenants for the subdivision. The cash proffer, as I indicated, matches the capital impact model. And they're also proffering a right turn lane along Hanover Avenue, and that would have a minimum 100 feet of storage and a 200-foot taper. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
Ms. Hunter, did you mention that a nearby subdivision had 3.5 acre lots?
Let me go back to that. Yes, the property to the east, let me get to that slide for you. And they range between about 3 and 5 acres.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I thought I heard.
Yes.
And didn't you say that this proposed subdivision would also have open space?
Yes, sir.
Well, even without open space, each house would only have like 2.55 acres, 23 acres and nine houses. That would be an average of, and that's without the any open area.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm assuming that with the open area, each house would be on a lot less than 2.5. Is that correct?
That's correct. The
Okay,
minimum lot size that they can have in the R1 district on private water and sewer is 1.5 acres, so that would be the minimum lot size.
Okay, it'll meet that requirement.
Right,
then.
but if you factor in the open space, it's about 2.3, I believe the number was.
Any other questions for Ms. Hunter?
No. Okay.
Thank you. Would the applicant like to speak?
Good evening. Andrew Browning, 926 Stonecastle Drive, Goochland, Virginia. with Youngblood Tyler and Associates here to represent Highview LLC. I did put together a small slideshow presentation. I'm going to skip through some of it rather fast rather than repeat most of what Ms. Hunter had said. Again, the property is located at the intersection of Oilville Road and Hanover Road. It's kind of a pie-shaped, pizza-shaped piece of property that fronts along Hanover Road, beginning at the intersection with Oilville Road. 23.1 acres of land, zone A2 currently. Again, mostly wooded now, except for the Dominion Power easement that kind of bisects the property. It is located within the Oilville Village, designated growth area on the comp plan, has low-density residential. We're proposing R1 zoning. The maximum number of lots as 9 lots on 23 acres, which would be, the density, if you backed into that, would be 0.39 lots per acre, including the open space. A little over 5 acres of open space, which is 24% of the site. We're just proposing one access on a Hanover Road, the right turn lane from Hanover Road. There's also, to the rear of the property along the northern boundary, there's a driveway that serves several residences back there. The driveway parcel is not owned by the residents. It's owned by a different owner, but they have a right to use it. We also proffer that no lots would be able to access that drive as well. And we agreed to pay the full cash proffer as determined by the capital impacts model. So this is the layout of the property. I might probably jump back to this in a minute. What I really want to talk about a lot was the citizens' concern. We had the community meeting, and several citizens came out and addressed their concern. Since the meeting, we've really been in contact with the neighbors almost continuously. I had an additional meeting out at one of the neighbors' homes, and we've had multiple email correspondence. The primary concern from the neighbors was how the subdivision would fit in with what's existing, how it will be screened from the existing neighborhoods, and they wanted some quality assurances for the proposed houses. So we did what we could to try to address these concerns within the proffers and with the plan. And so we jumped to the proposed home. So we proffered, sorry, I hit the wrong button. We proffered elevations, which were shown on the Exhibit B. We proffered that any new home would have a living area of at least 2,500 square feet, and we excluded the garage. And then we proffered several buffers along the Hanover Road and the property lines. To get to the houses, we're anticipating that the houses would be kind of a mix of styles, kind of new age stuff today, craftsman style, arts and crafts, some traditional farmhouse. We proffered an elevation. Again, we proffered the 2,500 square feet. We're estimating the houses would be around $400,000 houses. And again, these are the elevations that we proffered. These houses are similar to Lanes Inn. Some of these, I think, are actually in Lanes Inn, Main Street Homes houses. We proffered several buffers. We proffered a natural tree-safe buffer along 50 feet along Hanover Road. We proffered a 25-foot buffer along the eastern boundary of the property. We proffered a 75-foot buffer along the northern boundary along the neighbors to the rear. And then we even went further than that and tried to proffer the building setback. And so R1 zoning allows for a 35-foot rear yard, and so we pushed that to 100-foot for the primary structure and 75-foot for the accessory structure. I'm going to go back to the plan a little bit. So we worked as hard as we could to try to address the concerns of the citizens. There were several citizens that showed up initially from Beacon Hill and across the road. I think we had several email correspondence with them. I think we addressed their concerns. Their concern was where the entrance came out. They thought, I think initially thought maybe houses would front out on Hanover Road. We're just going to have one entrance off of Hanover. All the lots would access that road. It's positioned in the spot along the road where the sight distance works, so it's on the outside of the curve, so you can see. Again, that, I'm sorry, which button makes that? Which one makes that point? So this is the houses back here in the rear, or nice houses, larger houses. So this is what we proffer the larger buffers. So we have a 75-foot buffer and then a 100-foot setback off of this line, a 25-foot buffer on this line, and then 50 feet along along Hanover Road. Mr. Myers made a comment about lot sizes of a neighborhood up the street. That neighborhood is outside of the Oldville Village, so the lots are a little larger. The Beacon Hill subdivision right next door, some of these first couple of lots are 1.6, 1.7 acres. So our lots are, if you just average the lot size of the lots, they're probably 1.6, a little over 1.6, 1.65 acres, the lots themselves, if you just average the lots. But again, R1 zoning allows for an acre and a half lot. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Tom Brown with Highview LLC's developers also here, could answer some questions.
Any questions?
Yeah, I would need the setback with the trees on the back side of the property, is that gonna interfere with septic? It's gonna be septic, right?
Yeah, so that was, they were pushing us to get bigger and bigger buffers, and we were trying to, we need a drain field and a primary and reserve. And so we went out and did some soil borings to see if the soil was suitable. And so we preliminarily have some drain field locations, and we think that we can, we can still maintain the buffer. And so drain fields are not allowed in that buffer, if that's what you're getting at. No, no, sir. So we're trying to maintain the natural trees, and there will be no disturbance in that 75-foot buffer.
Does the setbacks or is that included in that 5.4 acres of open space?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir.
Any other questions for Mr. Browning?
No.
Thank you.
All right, we will now open the public hearing for anyone in support or opposition of the application. Seeing no one. Mr. Lyle.
Where do you live?
Usually in a state of confusion, but at 1521 Mannequin Road. This is in the village, and that really, I appreciate it following the comp plan where we're putting development where the comp plan suggested. I did observe the discussions and the solution that came up with the Bridgewater subdivision, and I saw the proffer for a turning lane. But will this be built to VDOT standards, and is it going to stay a private road, or eventually will the county, or should I say VDOT, take responsibility for that? Just not knowing the answer to that and realizing what a solution had to be created for that. I'm not sure if it's in the proffers, it'll be to VDOT standards and will eventually become a road. So other than that, I think this makes a lot of sense. And as long as we know we aren't creating another Bridgewater, even though I am an alumnus of Bridgewater College, I'll sit down now.
Thank you, Mr. Lyle. Anyone else would like to speak in favor or opposition? Would the applicant like to address Mr. Lyle's concern regarding the road?
We plan to have a state-maintained road, so it will have to meet the state standards, and we're going to turn it over to VDOT.
All right. And we're closing the public hearing. I should do that. Do we have any questions, comments, motions?
I move we accept it.
It's Mr. Duke and Mr. Patuk, seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Mrs. Parker.
We have no old business and no other business.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.